Were you surprised by this, Brendan? I think the kind of the conventional wisdom here is if you go on to Outkick and talk to Clay Travis, and then you go on Buck and Sexton and talk about running, a week or two ago, everyone kind of assumes you're going to run, but he decided now is not his time, and perhaps it looks like maybe he still has a future at ESPN. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Finebaum's 70 years old. This felt like partially a retirement plan, as odd as that sounds, right? Like, he wins, he's in the Senate till he's almost 80, and then he goes on with his life. I think it's almost like one of the more normal Charlie Kirk related stories we got, which is somebody was driven to potentially actually, get involved with politics because they were so aghast at the state of the country. And then for whatever reason, he hasn't really explained exactly what went into why he was going to do it and now he's not and all those sorts of things. But I would hope he would maybe just realize that he's probably not the best guy for that job, even if he could win. And I'm just going to choose to look at it through rose-colored glasses and think maybe Paul Finebaum is seeing what all of us know, which is that a sports host probably shouldn't be in the Senate, despite all of the things telling us he would have been an incredible likelihood to win that seat because of his name recognition and fame. Probably not the guy who should be one of 100 people running the country. So salute for him realizing that and backing off.
Yeah, I'm pouring one out for us here at Awful Announcing for like the dozens and dozens of posts that we probably would have gotten out of a Paul Finebaum Senate run. But I do think you're kind of spot on here where Finebaum's a really smart guy. Like if you listen to him in interviews, like he has an awareness that I don't know a lot of other people in his similar positions to him have, which I think was the most surprising part about him floating a Senate run is like he seems like someone that could acknowledge those realities that maybe he is not one of the 100 people that should be sitting in a Senate seat. But I digress. So what do you think his future is at ESPN? Because I think that's the big question now.
Yeah.
We were all kind of assuming that maybe this is the end of Paul Finebaum on ESPN. Mm-hmm. No more Mouth of the South. Now, it seems like he could go on for several more years now.
Yeah, I think so, right? But so I think to answer that question, we partially have to go back a little bit. And I think that the other question that comes to my mind is, what do you think really happened with ESPN kind of momentarily sidelining him? He did miss appearances, but then by the time it got attention, he was back. And ESPN was able to deny that he had been punished or benched in any kind of way. But clearly, I think something happened there. What do you think it was?
So I don't know if you listen to the press box, Brendan. They have they have kind of a tradition there of kind of giving the most favorable read to people in positions of power, just kind of play situations out. And try not to speculate. That's what I've done with the Paul Finebaum situation at ESPN with his benching. I don't think there was any directive from ESPN executives that said, all right, like we're taking Finebaum off the air, at least temporarily, to try to figure out what his future is with the network. I'm thinking that it was more the show producers that probably made that decision, because you hear Paul Finebaum go on Outkick and you say, well, maybe we don't want him on the show a day later. That might be a little controversial. We'll find someone else. And then there's also a theory along those lines of if Paul Finebaum is going to run for Senate, we need a Paul Finebaum replacement for this show. We need to find someone else that can talk college football for us. That's not going to be Paul Finebaum. So I think there was logical reasons why the individual shows would have decided not to put Finebaum on the air that week. So I kind of am siding with the ESPN corporate narrative here that I don't think there was any directive to keep him off of ESPN.
I could see that. And I think the most conspiratorial answer would be because he's a Republican, right? And I don't think either one of us think that. What I think could have happened is They just didn't appreciate that he didn't give them advance notice. I could see that he maybe kind of freelanced his way onto this appearance with Travis originally, and then it kind of surprised people at ESPN, and maybe they were just getting their bearings of like, okay, are you actually announcing when? What's the timeline? What's your, and that could be why that blip happened. Either way, I think one thing I could see happening is, because of the increased leeway that ESPN now gives its talent, especially its star talent, which I think he qualifies as, to talk about some of these things. Maybe he can satisfy his urge to weigh in and be part of this circus, which I'm calling it a circus. He probably would not call it a circus. Is to go on shows like that more. Just be a regular on the Clay Travis show from now on, or I think it's called the Outkick show, whatever. Be on Fox News, do stuff like that more regularly, and maybe that can be somewhat of a compromise. But like this, again, this guy's 70 years old. He's far closer to the end of his career. I don't think, if we're talking about just, okay, he's not going to do this, what's the future at ESPN? I don't think he's going to be adding new roles and responsibilities to his plate. I think he's just going to be Paul Finebaum, but maybe we'll see more of him in these other arenas because of everything he said.
Yeah. I think if we were to see action on ESPN's part, it's going to be because he went directly to one of ESPN's biggest and most outspoken critics to make this announcement. Like, I'm sure, I can readily admit here, I'm not visiting outkick.com very often, but I'm sure if you went on their homepage, most days you're going to find some sort of headline about ESPN or an ESPN talent, something they said or how ESPN covered a certain thing and why it's wrong and it's woke and it's, ESPN's liberal bias showing. I think that more than anything is probably what would upset ESPN. But I do agree with you that like a person of Finebaum's stature kind of has the leeway to do what he wants if he wants to be more like Stephen A. Smith and be more outspoken on politics and appear on cable news and political podcasts and whatever. I think he has that cachet. I mean, I think he was on CNN like a day or two ago.
Yeah, and that's Caitlin Collins, who's a
Yeah.
Bama super fan who always has brought him on to mostly talk sports. But yeah, I could see, could he be a Charles Barkley, Stephen A. Smith type of character where he's in the mix on this stuff? I think I could see it, and he does bring a perspective from actually living and experiencing a part of the country that goes overlooked often in those conversations that I think has value. Now he's stepped in it with, the Bomani Jones argument from many years ago and some things like that will bring negativity toward ESPN that they might not appreciate. But hey, if you let Pat McAfee have the president on, or you let Stephen A. Smith do what he does, and any number of these other things with these borrowed talent types of arrangements, then you can't exactly turn around and tell people no quite as easily as you used to be able to. My question for you last here is, Front Office Sports put a list out when we still weren't sure about Finebaum's destiny on this of 11 people that they think could replace him. And we have a gimmick like this we might dip into when we need an episode here on the play-by-play soon. But I wanted to see who you thought was the most likely. There's some names here I will admit I don't know about, so I'm not even going to list them. But you think he is one of the primary voices on the SEC Network pregame show alongside now Tim Tebow, which is, pretty powerful slate there. But he's also a regular on Get Up and First Take and numerous other Sports Center and podcast appearances that he does at ESPN, as well as his show, which, is radio in that form going to be something that matters going forward? I guess that's up to what you think. But they had Josh Pate, Greg McElroy, Cole Kubelich, who I think is actually currently recording the Awful Announcing podcast, so we will hear from him more soon. Marty Smith and Ryan McGee, Alyssa Lang, or Booger McFarland.
I think out of all those, Josh Pate kind of fits the bill the best. That's kind of already his style of content is what Finebaum does. I don't know if Pate does like kind of the callers like Finebaum's show is famous for, but if we're talking about the type of commentary, Pate is giving. I think that's more analogous to what Finebaum does on a daily basis than
Those
most of the others on the
broader,
list.
big picture commentaries, not about the zone coverage that Bama's playing, but
Exactly.
yeah, I think. And he has a radio background, also from the South. Pate was first on their list, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I actually have one more question for you. Do you know Paul Finebaum's contract situation? Like, do we know when his contract's up?
I feel like it was discussed when he originally went on Outkick and talked about that stuff. But I don't think this was tied to his contract being up. If I remember, it wasn't like, I think it was just the nature of, hey, the primary soon, make a choice. So
Right.
I think he's locked in.
Okay. I think then, like, we know his immediate future with ESPN is probably safe, but I wouldn't be surprised if, ESPN has a pretty long memory about this stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if he struggles to renew his contract when it comes time with ESPN because of this.
So Michael McCarthy wrote in early November that his contract runs through mid 2027, which I would imagine is just like post college football season and draft,
Yeah.
So 2 years or one, really 1.5 years.